I'm here with Bart Campolo. Thank you very much for joining me today.
You're very welcome, man.
Yeah. So
Where are you? Where do you record these? Where do you record these entities?
I'm a nomad. I'm all over the place. I don't have a dedicated
Okay.
studio. I like right now I'm in my apartment. So yeah.
Okay.
But what about you? Do you have a studio set up?
To call it a studio would be really stretching it, but I do have this room in my house that has carpeted floors and is
Okay.
quiet, and there I am.
um.
Yeah.
Well, nice. The
I'm glad to be talking
I'm
to
no,
you.
I'm really glad to be talking. There's a number of reasons why I wanted to talk to you. But the reason why I thought this would be an interesting podcast is because you have, um, I think you're the only person I know who is so deeply involved in the evangelical Christian community, came out of it, and is now so deeply involved in the secular humanist community. Um, uh, People listening probably don't know your experience growing up, but you grew up with your father as a pretty well known preacher, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. My dad is kind of evangelical royalty.
he Royalty wasn't he? I'd read in
Uh,
the New York Times article he was like an erstwhile spiritual advisor to Bill Clinton at some point.
Oh yeah, I mean he's that guy who speaks at all the big conferences and when Clinton got in trouble 20 some years ago, he was, um one of the ministers that went to the White House on a weekly basis to kind of counsel with him and try to help him figure out how to get back on the straight and narrow, if you will. He remains really good friends with both the Clintons. And so, it's a little different now.
Do you think that is that real?
What that
Is that real? Because I imagine, and no, not the friendship part. I mean when it, I can't imagine that Bill Clinton really believes in God.
it's so interesting, because I remember when my dad was first sort of. I remember I was out to dinner with my dad one night, and it was the State of the Union address, and he had been down to some meet and greet with a few clergymen at the White House, and when he had met Clinton, he had handed him a couple of books that he had brought with him, his own books, sort of, hey, here, it's just like a thing that people do, and you don't expect anything to come of it, and a few weeks later, the State of the Union address was on, and I got a call from my mom saying, "You should, like Clinton just mentioned your dad in the State of the Union address."
Oh.
And sure enough, he had been talking about like people that were doing good things in the world. He said, "Yeah, like my good friend Tony Campolo," and they were not at that time good friends. They had met, um, but it's funny because that's my dad's. That's a very similar thing my dad would do. Like if he meets somebody, he's like, "Oh yeah, we're friends." Like he's friends with lots of people that I'm like, I would, we shook hands once, but
Yeah.
but immediately when you get mentioned in the State of the Union address, I mean his phone was blowing up and people were calling him and people were like, "Who is this Tony Campolo guy that Clinton's talking about?" People were doing research, and he got a call from the White House, um, and they said, and the person called and said, "You have a very interesting." It was one of the president's advisors, and he said, "You have a very interesting decision to make." He said, "You can talk to the president, or you can talk about the president, but you can't
Mm.
do both." And my dad, in that moment, sort of decided that maybe, yeah, I remember saying to him, like, maybe he needs a friend, Dad. Maybe that's what maybe it's an aspirational, maybe he's reaching, maybe he's trying to befriend you. And he said, "Yeah, I'm going to see what happens." So he started going down there to hang out, and they would spend hours together. Um, and he never told anybody.
Was your mother worried?
No, this funny thing, like, he, you say, "Well, what did they talk about?" He said, I never knew. He never would say to anyone. And I remember at one point thinking, like, you may be getting used politically. You may be sort of a cover or a screen. And he said, that's a possibility. He said, but I decided a long time ago that if somebody said they wanted your help, you should take them at their word. And you might be getting, whether it's an alcoholic or a drug addict or whatever, you might be getting manipulated, but you have to try. In some sense, you have to take people at their word. And if they lie to you or if they manipulate, that's on them. But he said, if you turned away help from somebody who was really struggling spiritually, he said that would be on you.
Mm.
And so they ended up developing this relationship. And if you knew my dad and if you knew Clinton, you would understand why they were fast friends. They have certain kinds of strengths in common. They have certain kinds of insecurities in common. But my dad sort of ended up grounding himself, like coming out of a kind of an insecure upbringing, but grounding himself in a really solid way. And they got each other. And so, like, if somebody says to me, do you think their friendship is legitimate? I mean, I've been in the room with both of them together, and like, yes, I think their friendship is legitimate. Do I know what kind of influence my dad had on him? Not at all. Do I know if Clinton's spirituality was a real thing? I have no clue. I have no more insight than the next guy because my dad would never speak of their conversations. Which is interesting, Duncan, because I thought about that since then. I thought about that since then, and I thought, like, that guy saying, like, you can talk to the president or you can talk about the president. I think, like, it's probably true of most of our relationships, if we're honest. Like, if you end up talking about people out of school, eventually they won't be open with you. You kind of have to choose whether you're going to be on the inside with somebody or whether you're going to dish on them, but you can't do both.
It's very true. You've always had, I think, a pretty grounded and interesting view of human relationships. And I know that was something that you valued your time in the church, because, I mean, maybe I should back up a sec. You growing up in this evangelical household, um, first off, my understanding of evangelical Christianity, I grew up Catholic, is basically based on portrayals in the media of the Bible Belt, and it's very cold and frigid, and uh, talking on a personal level. No, Bart, you still here? He was not. After some troubleshooting, here's where the conversation picked back up.
So Duncan,
yes,
you were telling me what your understanding of evangelical Christianity is.
Well,
but the truth.
Go ahead.
The truth of the matter is, like the if you want to, I'm sort of thinking, like, maybe you just want me to, like, give you, like, a little synopsis of how I got through life. Because the evangelical Christianity I grew up in wasn't Bible Belt. My dad was a college professor at a little Baptist college, but also at the University of Pennsylvania. He was a sociologist. And I grew up surrounded by, I guess, what you would call sort of progressive, social justice oriented Christians. I mean, these were still people that took the Bible seriously and literally, and believed that Jesus bodily rose from the dead and flew away into heaven, and that the second coming was coming, and that people that accepted Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior would be forgiven for their sins and go to heaven, and everybody else was in trouble. And therefore, it was incumbent upon us to share the gospel and to try to win people to Jesus, so that not only so that they could be saved, but also so that there would be more and more and more people that were doing the will of God in the world, such that the kingdom of God could be brought about on earth. So these are people that really, the kind of Christians my dad and his friends and the people I grew up around, these were really lovely people who were excited about the love side of Christianity. And they didn't major on the judgment stuff. My problem with them was not that they were so judgmental. My problem with them was I just didn't believe in God.
Right.
And so I thought they were all wonderful people. When I was in high school, a guy on my soccer team took me to his youth group, and I got swept up in this 300-person youth group that were the nicest people I had ever met. and I just wanted to be part of them, that gang, and they were all Christians, and I started sort of going along and sort of going through the motions of Christianity. And at some point in one of those big, Christian retreat settings where everyone's lighting candles and confessing their sins and asking God to change them, I had a kind of a supernatural experience. I had kind of a transcendent moment, and I started believing in God. And I accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior, and I decided to surrender my life to Jesus so that He could use me to make the world a better place. And so I got swept up in it when I was in high school, and I became one of those very committed Christians who reads their Bible in the morning and prays every day and is trying desperately not to masturbate or look at pornography, and to please Jesus and to make the world. I was this very,
Yeah.
very into it guy, all the way through high school. Went off to college, and at some point in that time, I ended up getting. Somebody said, will you run a summer camp for Jesus in the inner city? And I said, yes, for Jesus, I'll do it. And I ended up going to the inner city and seeing poverty really for the first time. Um, and that changed my life again. And I ended up devoting myself to becoming a kind of an inner city missionary, a person that was going to live and work among the poorest of the poor and try to lift people up and out of poverty and make lives better and all of that stuff for Jesus. And so I spent the next, 20 years working in inner cities with young people and training other people to work in inner cities with young people and speaking on college campuses and recruiting young people to come and work with me in the inner city with young people. Um, and so, I became kind of that guy. And I became, my dad was this big shot platform speaker in the Christian world. And I kind of became a AAA platform speaker in the Christian world. I became a person that got invited to speak a lot, and I kind of made my living um, preaching and challenging young people to serve Jesus by serving the poor. And I did that all the way through until I was like in my 40s. And and the short version of that story is that all along that journey, from the time I was 15 and accepted Christ until I was about 45 and walked away, my commitment to loving relationships got stronger. My commitment to social justice got stronger. My commitment to building community got stronger. And my ability to believe in a supernatural God who actually did anything died the death of 1,000 cuts
Let's please.
until at some point I was just done.
I want to take a step back for just a sec because you were describing this transcendent
Yeah.
experience in high school. As someone who's on the other side now, what do you think was going on there?
Well, it's funny because I talk to people who have never been Christians, and sometimes they'll sort of chide me and go like, I bet you feel funny, because when you were a Christian, you pretended that you heard God's voice, or you pretended that you felt led by the Holy Spirit, and now you're admitting that there's nothing there. I'm like, oh no, no, no. Like, I heard voices. I felt stuff. Like, I sensed myself being guided from without. Like, that's the weird thing about religious devotion is that if you believe it, it kind of can become real for you. And when people say like, "Do you believe in God?" I'm like, "No." But if they go like, "Do you believe that people sincerely hear God's voice?" I go like, "Absolutely." Those experience. I mean, if you don't believe in transcendent experiences, if you don't believe that you can be sort of overwhelmed by a force greater than yourself, I'm like, well, I guess you just haven't been to the right rock concert,
Mm.
or you haven't fallen in love with the right partner, or you haven't used the right drugs. You know, Psychedelics deliver these experiences on a regular. And you go like, well, do you think that there is a God actually speaking to people? Like, no, that's stuff going on in your brain, but it feels real.
Right.
For all intents and purposes, you are encountering something, and it can change you. It can educate you. It can shape your values. Like that stuff. I mean, as a secular person, I really believe that in that the material world is all that there is, but I still try to cultivate sort of a spirituality or an openness to that kind of experience, because I think that that's a part of the human experience that we're often very closed off from. And religion is a portal, but it's not the only portal.
That's it's an interesting concept, religion being like a portal. And when you describe your early years coming into this, I can see, just based off what you're telling me, what the excitement could be about. But was there any? I'm just trying to imagine that if I was raised in an evangelical family, even one as loving and non-judgmental as yours, um, I would think that at some point in my high school years, I would just out of teenage whatever would rebel against that. Was there any part of you that was like, I'm trying to break free, or did you feel like this path just made sense to you?
Well, I mean, I wasn't forced into it. Like, when
Yeah,
I was
okay,
in
yeah.
high school, my parents weren't making me go to church, but I was a nice kid. I was the kind of kid who, if some kid was getting bullied, I felt like I needed to step in and protect them and, sit next to the kid who had no friends in class and all that stuff. And, when I came into that youth group, it was like a club for nice kids where the focus was, how do we become better at loving people and how do we become better at making things better for other people? And there's a big part of our human wiring that is tribal. That is, I want to help the tribe. I want to be useful. I want to feel like my life is meaningful. I want to feel like I matter. And Christianity for me was a huge vehicle to feel like I was doing something that mattered and that I was engaged in a struggle against evil and wrongdoing and suffering, and that I was doing something meaningful with my life. And so, for me, it was a real easy fit. Um, the weird thing was there was always, if you get into Christianity on the basis of the love side of it, you quickly go like, but wait, like, so God's really going to send all those other people to eternal damnation? Like, that seems out of character. Or, gosh, when I went to college and I met gay people and I was, openly gay people and I became friends with them, and they felt so judged. And I was in a camp of Christianity that sort of said like, hey, God loves you, but you got to stop that. That's not, it's not okay. And I was uncomfortable with that. So I was uncomfortable with the idea that non-Christians would suffer and die in hell. And I was uncomfortable with the sexual judgmentalism of it all. And I was uncomfortable with the fact that we often prayed for really good people to get healed, and they didn't. And so when I say the death of a thousand cuts, for me, Christianity didn't get attacked from the outside. It was always internally inconsistent. And you're encouraged when you're in a faith like that to sort of, these are matters that are too great for you, like trust God and all that stuff. But because I was working in very poor neighborhoods in situations that were really dire, I was often asking God to do stuff that, I don't know, it felt like, any nice God would want to help out in this situation. A little girl getting sexually abused at home. Like, could we get her some protection? Should we get her out? You know, an old lady with who's raising 6 grandchildren because her kids are all, drug addicts or in jail, and she gets a heart attack. That would be a good you would think like maybe we could heal her. Um, she's really a good person. And she would die and it would create chaos. And so for me, it was hard, but it wasn't about rebellion. It wasn't like, I want to do my own thing. It was sort of like, at certain points, I felt like I was nicer than God, or I had, like,
If you admitted that to
if that
yourself,
makes
did
any
you
sense.
automatically feel really bad?
Well, yeah, like, what they teach you is who are you to question God?
Right.
Like, like it's way more complicated than you think. And I'm thinking like, at some point, and I'm not the only one, Dostoevsky went through this, like lots of people go through this, where they go like, hey, how does God justify all this stuff? And, and believe me, I kept changing my conception of God all the way through. I ended up sort of dialing back what I thought. I came up with a conception of God that said that God, it wasn't that he was not willing to do all these things. It was that in order to love people and have them love him in return, he needed to make people free. And so God was kind of constrained by human free will. He couldn't force us to do things. He had to kind of win us and woo us. And that became a real motivation for me to do ministry work, was to try to sort of win people over to doing God's will, because the more of us did God's will, the more that God's will would be done. So I found ways not to blame God. But over the years, you keep dialing it back, and you realize that, for the last 5 years of my Christian life, I didn't think God was capable of actually intervening and doing anything. He was just like a nice concept, like sort of a moral role model. And you end up, if you change the God you believe in often enough, it soon don't, the last God I believed in he was perfect. Like, he loved gay people. He wasn't pulling the strings on any bad stuff. He agreed with me on all my political decisions, and you go like, after a while you go like, oh, I think I invented this God. I think this God is a projection of my own ideals.
Right.
And a God like that, as much as you might like him, he doesn't have much authority in your life. You realize that this is a human creation.
I don't know if you've ever read Tolstoy's Confessions, but he talks about how of a story of two brothers who are on a hunting trip, and they're about to go to bed, and the one brother prays, or like, puts his hands together to pray, and the other brother is like, oh, like, you still do that? And then after that, he's like, oh, I'm just, it was almost like the last sort of twig to flake off, that it's already, the base of support is so weakened that, once you have some sort of event out.
Yeah, I mean, Duncan, I had a bike crash. Yeah, I had a bike crash that
Right.
where I had a head injury and I couldn't think straight for a month. And when I recovered, it didn't change my mind it didn't change my mind, but it changed my way of looking at the world. I was like, wow, I'm going to die. And when I die and this brain breaks down, I won't exist anymore. Like, I became pretty convinced, like, my identity is in my brain, because like, if you smash my brain against a tree at 40 miles an hour, it'll change my identity for a while. And when it was, as I was recovering, I remember saying to my wife, like, this life is all we get. And she's like, yeah, I think that's true. She said, I think you better stop being a professional Christian. You don't believe any of it anymore. You don't believe in eternal life. You think this is all there is.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, that's right. And she's like, okay, then you're done. And so that, so I had that experience, but like, when I told people that were close to me, hey, I'm not a Christian anymore, or I'm post-Christian, nobody was surprised. They were all like, oh yeah, we knew. We were wondering when you would figure it out. Sort of like that brother in the story. Like, he already, like, it's a vestigial tale. It's a habit. And when somebody questions it, he goes like, oh yeah, I guess. And you go like, well, when did you really stop believing? And he goes, I don't even know. Well, a long time ago, but I just recently became aware of it. And so for me, it was a lot like some of my gay friends who were sort of like, they told people, I'm gay. And people were like, we knew. We were wondering when you'd figure it out. And I was like, I'm secular. And they were like, we knew.
Yeah.
And so then the question became, how do you, by that time, I'm a minister, I'm a preacher, I run a Christian nonprofit organization. Like, what do you do? How do you make the transition from being a professional Christian communicator to being a post-Christian, whatever it is that you're going to become? And that was, that started in 2001. No, 2011. I'm sorry, 2011. And so that's what,
Right.
9 years ago, and I'm
Well,
still
I
figuring
think
it out.
it's a really compelling and in many ways courageous story because there are, and I haven't met any, but I've read articles about priests and preachers who do not believe in God, but they've invested 20 years in this life, and it, it's almost as how do I switch career paths, and you sort of get stuck. For you,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, do you?
Oh, I know loads of them. I mean, I counsel with loads of them. Oh golly, yeah. I mean, because I'm a fairly I was a high profile Christian. My deconversion was fairly high profile when people found out about it. So a lot of ministers come to me, sort of going like, "What do I do?" And I remember this old Chris Rock comedy shtick where he was talking about. He said, "A man is as faithful as his options."
Mm.
Sort of like saying like, you know, if somebody's really faithful, it's probably because they have to be. And I think in some ways, I had the option to deconvert. I wasn't. My wife had gone on the same journey with me. She was done too. Um, my kids were grown. My friends were all these kind of hyper progressive Christians who weren't going to throw me away if I didn't believe in
Right.
God anymore. My parents, as significantly committed to the evangelical movement as they are, I knew for a fact that they weren't going to shun me or disown me. Um, and so, and I had an Ivy League education, and I was a relatively smart guy who thought like, I'll figure something else out. I can sell aluminum siding if I have to. Like
Was that really what was
I
going through your mind?
I
Aluminum
knew that there
siding?
were other not aluminum siding per se, but yeah, I was confident. I mean, and also I'd been an inner city missionary my whole life, so like I didn't have a very high economic footprint. I didn't, we lived very simply, and so I was sure that like we were going to be okay. And my wife was saying, I want you to have integrity. I want you to, I don't want you to have to pretend you're something that you're not. Um, and so I know lots of people who don't have those options, who, if they came out openly secular, it would threaten their marriage, or it might cut them off from their community. It might cost them their job. And they might be not in a position where they feel like they have the skills or the ability or kind of the mindset to make a big change at that point. I know people that, in their Christian work are helping people get off drugs and helping people find housing and helping people keep their marriages together. And they're like, if I walk away from this, a lot of people are going to get hurt. A lot of people aren't, this church that I'm the pastor of may fall apart. Um, and that'll hurt a lot of people, put a lot of people out of work. And so they're sort of, you know, maybe I just fake it and hope that my faith comes back, or maybe I just fake it until I can find a way out that won't hurt as many people. I mean, Woody Allen has this great joke that I know you're not supposed to quote Woody Allen anymore, but at one point in Annie Hall, he's talking. He says, this guy goes in to see a psychiatrist, and he says, I got a real problem here. My brother-in-law thinks he's a chicken, and he squawks and clucks around, and he wants us to call him a chicken. He wants us to feed him chicken feed. He says, really, I don't know what to do. And the guy says, well, have you thought about bringing him in to get him some help? And he goes like, yeah, I would, but we really need the eggs.
Pretty
And,
good one.
and like this thing is insanity, but it's working for us. And I know people for whom Christianity is the thing that's working for them emotionally or financially or in some other way. And, it's real easy for people on the outside to say like, well, you should tell the truth, have integrity, like speak your mind. And like, that's easy for you to
Yeah.
say. I got kids. I got a wife or a husband, my parents I got a friend right now. His parents are 80, 88, 90 years old, they're about to die. He's like, if they found out that I had, this guy had been a
Right.
missionary for 30 years. He's like, if they found out that I didn't believe in God anymore, it would crush them right before they die. It might kill them. He's like,
Oh
I'm
no,
going to lie.
absolutely
I'm going
not.
to lie about this until they're dead and then I'll come out. I don't have any judgment for that. You know, I mean, honestly, lying, I, I don't think lying is in general a great idea or a great life strategy. But there are times in a person's life when they must not only lie, but they should lie with vigor and imagination and creativity. Like when lying is absolutely the right thing to do.
Yeah. No, that's very true.
And so yeah, so I feel very fortunate,
Okay.
Duncan, that when I'd come to the end of my Christian journey, that I was allowed to get off the bus.
The one thing that you mentioned in there that I want to touch on was the having a low economic footprint, which I talked to this guy who wrote a book recently called Silent Sheep. It's all about schools, elite colleges. They're the sons and daughters of.
You talked to that guy?
I did, yeah. Um,
I
yeah.
love that book.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That book was incredibly formative. Yeah, when I was at USC, I read that book. I quoted that book. Yeah, gosh, that's wonderful. I'm
Yeah,
glad you got
he's
to talk to
and
him.
I know you have a podcast. I'm sure if you're interested, he would definitely respond to you. If he's going to respond to me. But the thing that he was talking about was that a lot of these kids, having grown up in sort of an upper crust society, they have in one sense they have all the options in the world available to them, but in another sense, because of the lifestyle they're used to, their options are actually quite narrow. Um, do you think that in many ways that w- w- we sort of limit ourselves to just based off of financial quote unquote necessity?
Yeah, I mean, I remember a friend of mine who was a marriage counselor out in California, in Orange County, telling me about talking to this couple whose marriage was coming apart because they were both working so hard and they just didn't see each other anymore, and their sexual relationship had faltered and their intimacy was gone, and they were talking, and he said, well, you know couldn't you couldn't one of you couldn't you both cut back, or couldn't one of you leave their job? And and um and they were like, oh no, like we are stretched out, we're at the edge, we're just barely hanging on. He said after the session was over, he walked out into the parking lot and he saw them getting into their Mercedes and her into her Lexus. And he looked up their address and realized that they lived on a house overlooking the beach. And he thought, you know, if you sold that house and moved to a house, not talking about going into poverty, but it's like if you lived, 5 miles inland and drove Hondas, he said they could have quit those jobs easily or cut back or cut to half time. And he said the problem wasn't that they were so materialistic. He said the problem was is that when he brought that up, he said the next meeting he asked them about that, and they looked at each other and they said, wow, that never occurred to us. Like they had never thought about living below their means because they had, they were in a culture and they were around, everybody was trying to, get the house on the beach. Everybody was trying to get the cars. Everybody was trying to get the look and the vacations and whatnot. And the weird thing is I think for most of us, it's a little bit like that old David Foster Wallace joke about the two fish swimming along, and the old fish comes up to the two little young fish and says, hey, how's the water? And the one fish looks at the other and says, what's water? Like, you don't even know the atmosphere you're swimming in. You're like, it's just a part of your world. And I think for a lot of us, the economic, especially for people who are um, talented, bright, privileged, educated, um, it's just the water they've been swimming in. And the idea of that this is a choice and that you could significantly lower your economic footprint, and that would relieve all kinds of pressure and create all kinds of new options for you. it's not so
Yeah.
much that people are like, I would never do that. I value my money too much, or I value my.
Um,
It's just never occurred to them. They just never have thought about it. They've never known anybody that did it. We used to joke when I was in mission work and about being downwardly mobile, but like there just aren't a lot of people that sort of embrace the freedom that comes with living below your means.
yeah, it's definitely something that uh, I mean, gosh, the fact that these things don't occur, in people's mind, like the idea of selling that house or the cars or whatever, um, it's, at a certain point our lives kind of become on autopilot almost. And the fact that you were able to make this transition away from the preacher lifestyle to you've left the preacher lifestyle. You're sort of just preaching a different flavor, would you say? I mean, in many ways, your atheism is much different than the atheism that's portrayed, at least in the media. I mean, there are people like Richard Dawkins who, for them, it seems like atheism is just a tool to show how intelligent you are. Or, there's a lot of a smugness that sort of permeates a lot of atheist dialogue, but that's totally absent from what you're doing, which is based much more off of.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Richard Dawkins' smugness, if you will, or his like, is kind of just because he's so much smarter than most people. I mean, just as a scientist, as a
Mm,
writer, I don't know how you could be as smart as he is and not be smug. Um, but I do think, like, I don't even really, I never call myself an atheist. I always call myself a humanist because, um, in our culture, atheism tends to mean not like I'm against religion, or I think religion is poisonous and I want to tear it down. And I had a great run in Christianity. I met lots of lovely people. I know lots of people who are sincere believers. I know that like you can't drag people out of a faith that that's working for them. I think that, and I think like if you wiped out all the religion in the world right now, it would reinvent itself, a week later. I mean, people in every culture invent, they sort of create and develop these ways of thinking because they serve some kind of cultural or evolutionary purpose. And I mean, so yeah, I'm not an anti-religion person. An atheist, it doesn't mean that technically, but in our culture, that tends to be the understanding. I don't call myself an agnostic because it makes it sound like I don't know what I think, and I do. I don't call myself a free thinker because I know a little bit about cognitive biases. Um,
yeah.
you know, I wish I was a free thinker. I call myself a humanist because what it means is like, yay, I really care about the human experience and I really care about loving other people and building community, but I do it without any kind of reference to any supernaturalism. Um, and so I, but yes, am I a humanist minister? Am I a humanist preacher? Am I a humanist counselor or caregiver? I hope so. Um, because those were all that stuff I learned in Christianity about community building and about helping people make better decisions and putting together programs and creating experiences that help people figure things out. That's not particularly Christian technology. That's just human technology. I mean, that kind of spirituality is part and parcel of being a finite person in a very scary world. Um, and so, yeah, my son was talking to me the other day. He said, like, so, like, if you were a comic book hero, would you say that your mission is to like create a new church for the future? And I'll go like, yeah, that's not bad. And like, I don't think human beings do very well alone. I think we need to come, we need tribes and rituals and all that stuff. I just think like for the future, we probably need to build more and more of those rituals and those communities around a pursuit of goodness that isn't supernaturally oriented because more and more people are not able to believe in that stuff. So yeah, I get on some level, I still am clergy.
Yes.
On some level, I still am clergy,
Well, I was going to ask.
Yeah.
One of the things that a lot of people say to atheists or non-believers, whatever you want to call it, is how can you be a good person without some ultimate authority like God justifying your code of ethics? How do you get around that?
You know, it's such I mean, to me, it seems self-evident um, that, they're all, yeah. To me, it seems self-evident that people pursue goodness for very natural reasons. But um, certainly from an evolutionary perspective, I remember reading Franz de Waal's book, The Bonobo and the Atheist, where he talks about how moral codes emerge among all pack animals, wolves, elephants, you know, that there's behavior. And what ends up happening is that the behavior that is tolerated and encouraged and allowed is the behavior not that's good for the individual, but that's good for the group. That morality emerges in the context of relationships. That what's right and wrong is basically what's right and wrong for us, you and me. What's going to work for us, and that it's something that emerges as kind of a subset of our instinct to survive. We come up with different strategies to survive, and pack animals, one of the strategies that they come up with to survive is to cooperate. And then even at a deeper level, to care for each other and to be loyal to one another and to love their children and to love their brothers and sisters. And it seems really self-evident to me that goodness works and that cruelty and selfishness don't naturally select. You say, but I mean, I'm not saying that there's no competition. I'm not saying that there's no conflict. Like that's part of the equation too. But there's no question in my mind that our instincts to love and to care, to forgive, to feel empathy, all of those instincts, they've all emerged because they work. And so when somebody says to me, why be a good person? I'm like, because that's your best chance at making the most of your one and only life. Every study and every statistics that I've seen shows that the people that live the longest, are the healthiest, and die the happiest are all people that have cultivated a handful of significant close relationships, are all people that have done work in their lives that makes things better for other people, not just themselves, are all people that have cultivated rituals and practices of gratitude and who have cultivated wonder and continue to be interested in learning more about the wonders of the world. Like this is the stuff that works for people. And so when people say, hey, if you don't believe in God, if there's no judge and no authority, you can murder and rape everybody you want to. I know I do. I rape and murder everybody that I want to, which is nobody. Like that's not how that doesn't work. That's it seems self-evident to me that religions emerge in cultures, not religions don't create the moral code; they codify it. These moral impulses are there, and people, as their communities become larger and more complex, they have to come up with mechanisms other than gossip and and shunning to enforce their moral codes. So they end up inventing, eyes in the sky and people that see you when you're all by yourself, and they codify these impulses, but the impulses are there, and that's why they look very similar across lots of different cultures. Because these are like you go like, well, without religion, we wouldn't know that incest doesn't work, and you go like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Like, and like evolution tells you incest doesn't work. Like it's not a good idea. The people that do a lot of incest, those genes don't last very long. And so, so in a sense, the thing is that religion didn't create morality. It's just the other way around. Morality ultimately led to the development of religions. When people were looking for ways to kind of strengthen and secure their moral codes in larger and more complex societies than they had lived in before. I mean, religion emerges in societies at a certain point in their sort of development without fail. When a society gets to a certain size, you're like, oh, then they're going to come up with a religion. It's a way of keeping the group together. And if you ask me, like, what's the work I'm doing now? I go, like, I'm just like, I understand that we need sort of gatherings and rituals, and we need shared stories and all that stuff. I'm just like, you know what? We probably should try to come up with some that are grounded in the stuff we really believe in. So the question is, can we tell the story of evolution in a way that is majestic enough and compelling enough that it inspires people to take themselves more seriously and to love life enough to honor it in themselves and in other people? That what a religion is supposed to do, or what a religion, when at its best, a religion is a way that a group of people, um, pursue life's ultimate questions and actualize life's ultimate values. And I'm like, okay, well, we should keep doing that. I've got some ultimate questions. Where do we come from? What happens when we die? What makes life meaningful? What makes something right or wrong? Like, I want to talk about those questions, and I want to pursue values of life and love and connection. And I want to see the human race continue forward. And you go like, wow, those sound like religious aspirations. And I go like, they are. Like, yeah, it's a secular religion.
The other aspect, not just the morality, but talking about the meaning of life. I had a friend of mine who is an atheist, and she got so bummed out and so depressed about the idea of, oh, well, ultimately we're just flecks of dust, and
yeah,
we
can be overwhelming,
end in nothing. And yeah. And is there anything? Sometimes I think that's just a feeling that people have, and they have to sort of process. But is there anything you would say to people like that?
But I mean, a good telescope can cause you to have an existential crisis. When you start to realize that far from being the center of the universe, we're infinitesimally small, and our lives are infinitesimally brief against the backdrop of what's happening around us. It can cause a crisis. And ultimately, people often say to me, what do you think is the meaning of the universe? And as far as I can tell, there is no meaning to the universe. It just is. I don't, my son is, he just came back from 5 days in Peru, ayahuasca. And he's convinced that there really is some meaning behind the whole thing now. I haven't seen any evidence of that. But if you say to me, is there meaning within the universe? I go like, oh, yeah, of course. Meaning isn't something that exists in the fabric of the whole universe, as far as I can tell. It's something that we create between us by caring about each other. And so meaning emerges when we fall in love, or when we see a baby and want to protect it, or when we see a landscape and want to protect it. We're meaningful. Meaning is something that exists between us, not within us. Something that holds us together and connects us. And so, when somebody feels that sense, I'm like, listen, like, you can look at we have lenses that will enable us to see, micromillimeters between cells, and we have other lenses that will let us to see light years away. And I said, you want to, if the scale is too small, you lose a sense of your own meaning. If the scale is too big for too long, you lose a sense of your own meaning. But at the human scale, at the scale of relationships between people, that's where meaning isn't hard to establish. And so I really tried, when somebody's like that, I'm like, I'm gonna try to pull them into a situation of human relationship, and I'm gonna say, okay, like this is a different lens. And you say, well, which lens is accurate? I go, God, they're all accurate. They're looking for different things, and a lens works by, filtering out certain stuff and letting in other stuff. So infrared lens will show you one thing. A thermo lens will show you a different thing. Uh, black light. There's all, and so in some sense, I think that we're attuned to find meaning at a certain scale, and when we are feeling lost and alone in the universe, it may be that we need somebody to help us refocus in the right proportion.
Bart, I think that is an excellent note to end it on. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
I appreciate these kind of conversations, and I appreciate the fact that you're continuing to just seek people out to have conversations and then share them, because I know that's part of how you make meaning, and it's part of how you contribute to the well-being of your brothers and sisters in this tribe. And so no, I'm grateful. I'm grateful to you, and I'm looking forward. I know you're going to be. You say you do this thing on the move. I know you're going to be on the move in some big ways, and I'm just really looking forward to seeing what you learn out there.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, and tell people what how they can reach you, your podcast and so on.
Oh, listen, and my podcast is probably a lot more. What's the word? I don't know. Do you ever listen to my podcast?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, like, how would you describe it? It's kind of like it's conversation. Like, I have conversations with lots of really cool people, but it all sort of cycles back to how do I use this new learning to build more loving relationships?
Yeah.
Because you're talking to somebody who really thinks that loving relationships are kind of the ultimate building block of meaningful lives. And so I call the show Humanize Me, because I'm talking to people from all over the map, and I'm asking them, hey, what can you tell me that can help me to be a better human being and a more loving human being? And so you can find that show anywhere where podcasts are found. It's Humanize Me. You can find me at bartcampolo.org. Strangely enough, Duncan, I don't know if you know, I'm in graduate school right now,
You had mentioned that, yes.
because I've been doing I've counseled people my whole life as a pastoral kind of guy. And now that I am out of a job in Christianity, it's taken me a while to figure out, like, how am I going to make a living? And I was counseling a lot of people, and some of my therapist friends said, you should just actually go get the license, and and that way you could advertise, and that way you could charge insurance. And so I'm working my way through to get official. But in the meantime, I counsel and coach lots of people via Skype all over the world who are working through religious transitions of their own, or who are struggling in relationships. And it's kind of, I guess it's kind of like a cross between pastoral counseling and coaching. It's the kind of stuff I did as a chaplain at USC, where I would sit down with people and talk with them about what was happening in their lives. And I got a lot of experience with that. And so that's the joy of my life right now, is that I have people all over the world that I'm working with to make their own lives better. And so again, you can find out all about that at bartcampolo.org too.
Yeah, no, I think you're gonna make a
I'd love
great.
to. I'd love to hear from it. I'd love to hear from anybody in your gang.
Good. I think yeah, no, I think you'd be a great counselor. And that's so perfect. I wish you the best of luck.
Man, I'll be talking to you again.
Please. Thank you to Bart Campolo. Thank you for listening to Dunk Tank. I'm Duncan Gammy. See you next time.